Welcome to another What I Would Have Done Thursday. Apologize I had to delay this video. Unfortunately, I was pretty busy over the weekend and did not have time to be caught up with all of my videos until now. But I should be uploading everything by the end of today as of Wednesday. So without further ado, let me address what I wanted to talk about for this particular What I Would Have Done Thursday, and that has to do with After Earth. Yes, the Shyamalan movie that is, I think, considered to be one where it sort of solidified the fact that uh, this particular director doesn't want to try anymore. And he just did, I think, a horrible science fiction project. If I were to look at a lot of science fiction films that I've seen, this is probably up there with being one of the worst that I've been exposed to, at least, or have had some sort of familiarity with. Because it's not only particularly fairly dull, but it's also very poorly constructed as well. So it's got a lot of problems, and I thought it would be interesting to kind of dive into a science fiction film, since I don't think I dived into that particular genre, at least as much when it comes to these sort of what I would have done videos. So let me kind of go through with you the problems and then basically what I would have done to fix them. Uh, it's safe to say, I think, that the first problem really stemming with this film is its acting. Oh my lord, this acting. It is unbelievably stale, uninspiring. I mean, especially when you want to make it more of a character piece, because the way they set it up is that the whole thing's sort of holding this film together is supposedly the relationship between Will Smith and his son. And I'm not going to even address their names by the film because they are so forgettable characters that it's hard to even remember these names. But really, oh, Cypher Rage though, that's still pretty funny for a Will Smith name they came up with. But regardless, you know, these two characters really did not get the life that they needed to get. And I don't know if this is necessarily Shyamalan who's directing these actors to kind of phone it in and be bland, or if it's the actors not really putting in forth their best effort. It could go either way. It could be in between, like that they didn't really know what they were really doing coming into this movie. And unfortunately, this is where the film really does fall flat from the way beginning. Because once you start hearing the characters talking, my lord, it is like you want to take a sleeping pill, or at least multiple sleeping pills, just so that you could go to sleep by how unbelievably dull it is. Like, it is just so, like, lacking in any form of charm or any form of real intimacy. I mean, there is just nothing going on with these performances. And this is a problem, especially when, again, you want to make it about a father-son dynamic or put that as part of your dynamic. I had a hard time even believing that Will Smith was related to his son in this movie, because the way they kind of present each other on screen is just so unbelievably unrealistic, and again, it's very robotic as well. So, oh, it just really made this film crash and burn. So I obviously would have given definitely way better direction to these actors. And if they didn't perform up to the standard, then obviously they shouldn't have been in the film to begin with. I think this can be attributed to a lot of Shyamalan movies that are like this with the acting. The acting is very stale. They don't really emote a lot of expressions. You know, it's very kind of, and I'm gonna talk like this the entire movie. And I'm not going to raise my voice, or even when I do, it's kind of random and doesn't really make any sense when I'm doing it. But, you know, it really does stem to be a problem with a lot of his films. So I almost want to say, you know, had I been in his position, I obviously would have given these actors a lot more to not only work with, but I would have, given them at least some direction as far as to how they should like emote these particular scenes that they're in. So that definitely needed to be changed. Another significantly important thing that this film lacks is sort of a good science fiction plot. Um, the whole premise sort of behind this, and again, this is where we get sort of Shyamalan's recurring theme of, destroying the environment is bad, which we've seen time and time again and done so much better in some other films, like like WALL-E, for example. And to see it shoved in here with really no purpose is kind of uh, ridiculous, and doesn't really give itself a whole lot of weight. Um, and the way in which they set up the aliens, again, they're not really given so much of an identity or a purpose. So it really makes your sci-fi film really stale in its construction. So I think what I would have done had I been in this role, I probably would have made it that instead of it being like, sort of the humans destroy themselves and then the aliens come in and destroy things. Um, and then you have this whole element of like, the aliens being able to sense fear or whatever, and I think that's just kind of unnecessary and sort of lame. I just would have had the plot have been, okay, it's been thousands and thousands of years, you know, uh, humans have been given sort of the capability to kind of leave Earth. So they go on to other planets, and they sort of leave Earth behind. And they kind of even forget about Earth. Like Earth is sort of an afterthought. Um, it's kind of like how we sort of treat, I guess, you know, particular areas within even within the United States. Like for example, you don't really have high populations of people where there is a risk of tornadoes or things like that. So I think if they treated Earth as like this thing that humans kind of evolved out of and thought, hey, there is other planets that are more sustainable for our species to survive, then I think that would have suited itself a whole lot better than trying to hone in this environmentalist message that we've seen time and time again in a lot of other sci-fi films and that have been done significantly better and significantly worse. So, yeah, had they just left the planet and just decided to go away and eventually kind of forget about it, and have it sort of become a little bit of an afterthought, um, I think that would have worked itself out a whole lot better. And then as a result of humans kind of leaving the planet gets, inhabited by animals, animals evolve and whatnot. Um, and maybe even some alien life form comes in and, sort of uh, takes part of the planet, or, kind of maybe they're like hunters, like the predators or whatever, something to that nature. I think would have been a whole lot more realistic, I think, into how you would approach such a science fiction idea. Like, just have the humans leave and sort of forget about Earth, and forget about its kind of existence, and, sort of leave it behind and consider it sort of an afterthought. Um, and also, we could have had, I think, in particular, a lot more development with Will Smith and his kid. Now, it's really established within the beginning that pretty much it's the majority of the film really does take place on Earth, where Will Smith's son has to go and light the beacon or whatever so that people can see him, or at least find him or get a signal. And I think that premise could have held itself up, but the problem is that we don't really get a huge sense of Will and his son's relationship in the beginning, because again, not only does the acting not help it, but it really doesn't work when you again are trying to make it about these two characters, and we don't really ultimately see a kind of progression and development, sort of leading up to when they end up crashing onto Earth. So I think what they could have done is okay, just had a significant portion of the film dedicated to Will Smith and his son. You know, they could have had aspects of the son maybe like underperforming, you know, in certain areas, and you know, the son feeling some inadequacy, um, you know, and I would have taken out the whole BS of Will Smith somehow killing the aliens and being able to not, you know, sense their fear or whatever. You know, that's all out the window. That wouldn't be part of the film. I would just have it be, you know, this father-son relationship, where they kind of don't get along initially because, you know, the dad wants his son to, I guess, be better, sort of, than what the son sometimes is maybe capable of, and so there's kind of this tension and disconnect. And maybe in order to kind of rekindle the relationship, Will Smith could have been like, okay, let us go on sort of like a mission. In other words, you know, something with dealing with space, or at least the society that they have built up, as far as humans are concerned. Because you could make an argument that, you know, they're trying to, since they're in a very advanced kind of civilization, they're trying to, you know, instill in the young people like performance and whatnot, and doing well under pressure and things like that. So I think had Will Smith wanted to try to teach his son a little bit, and had that have been the sort of motivation to kind of go out and kind of explore space and, you know, sort of bond, I think that would have been a whole lot better than trying to do this so quasi pseudo mission that really doesn't really hold up or make a huge amount of sense. So I think that would have been much better. And then they crash land on Earth without really knowing that it is Earth, because again, the humans have forgotten it over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And in order to, you know, basically attract a signal from outer space, and sort of make contact with somebody, they have to go to a certain area. And again, Will Smith's son is really up to the task for it because his dad ends up getting injured in the whole expedition that they end up going on. And so this kind of is sort of a test for the son to kind of prove himself, and what he's capable of. Obviously, you can insert the various trials and tribulations and whatnot. As far as to whether or not both characters end up kind of surviving, I think you could have played along with who really ends up living and dying. I mean, I don't think necessarily either way would have been bad, if they had both characters live, if they had one character die. I don't think that necessarily would have been a bad thing. And, you know, you can also see how the aliens become a problem because they sort of are like hunters and whatnot that have sort of inhabited the planet. And you also have to deal with all of the various species that have formed around the planet, you know, and all of that stuff. And I think that would have worked well. And then at the end, you know, have some kind of success, or some kind of way in which they are able to make contact with another planet. So I think this would have been a better setup, instead of trying to stuff in all of this stuff that really doesn't have a huge amount of sense to it and really doesn't hold itself up. See, the thing is this too is you really don't, and this is the thing that I think oftentimes people mistake as far as science fiction is concerned. You don't need to make it entirely over the top and complex. Like, you don't need to insert a ton of things and make it a good science fiction film. In fact, a lot of science fiction films that rely on certain elements but don't force in various things that don't end up producing anything is really what amounts to the film being a standout. And again, this can be applied to obviously other genres, but I think in particular, sometimes there is, I think, this need, in particular with the sci-fi genre, to try to push in all of this stuff in order to make it seem like it's smart and intellectual when it's really not, because a whole lot of it doesn't make a huge amount of sense. So again, and I definitely can say that a lot of people who enjoy science fiction would obviously kind of cringe a little bit at this film, probably too. And I think that's really, though, all I can say. I mean, obviously, I think they did some bad work as far as the graphics are concerned. I'm pretty sure there's, if I'm not mistaken, there is a significant amount of CGI and whatnot, and, you know, just really ultra bad, you know, writing as well, that obviously could have been changed. But I think a lot of these flaws, again, come back to the acting, the characters, and sort of the plot. And I think had those things really ultimately been altered, we would have gotten something that I think would have been a whole lot better and would have actually worked to its advantage. Because its ultimate premise, I don't think, is necessarily bad. It's, again, how it executes the premise that really is what makes or breaks any film. And here, this is why it was significantly broken. Um, but I think that's really ultimately all I can say. I'd be more than happy to hear what anybody else is saying as to what they would have done with this particular film. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.